I said in the beginning of my slavery video that I hadn't met any good white people, and my definition of good is that you understand that this is a question of power, that you be willing to give up some power. That's my definition of good white people, and I haven't met any like that.
I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, a podcast where we talk about classical music and other things. I don't know. I'm still working on that. I'm still working on this new tagline, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
I want to, we've been starting out these opuses with some announcements. So first and foremost, I want to shout out Dell for cooking a delicious beef bourguignon. I'm feeling real cozy right now.
Yeah, we almost had to make a pot of coffee to sort of fend off the food coma.
There's been a lot of new energy and new listeners and all that. So I want to shout out all the new listeners. If you're checking out TRILLOQUY for the first time today, if recently you've been checking us out for the first time, thanks. I really appreciate that. It's exciting that folks are starting to really pay attention to what we're doing.
And drop us a line. We'd love to hear what your thoughts on the podcast are, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything.
Yeah. I want to say hello and give a shout out once again, one of many shout outs to Katie and Delaney over at Classically Black. They gave me Black Excellence last week, and I'm really appreciative to that. They did gave me a great honor.
Were you surprised?
Well, I mean, maybe not surprised, but just thankful, and I really appreciate what they're doing. If you don't know the podcast Classically Black, definitely go check that out. Just so much fun. Just a nice way to give a laugh or two, and when you're feeling down and you want to connect it with a bit of classical music.
I was going to bring them up in the strike a chord movement.
Also, we'll be talking about them a little later.
We'll be talking about them.
I want to shout out James Napoli. So he wrote an article about me and about TRILLOQUY for Rewire. As we record this right now, actually, Scott, it's on the homepage of pbs.org. So again, finally famous.
Yeah, congratulations on arriving in print.
And then for the end of my little announcements here before we get into the first movement, I want to shout out two former TRILLOQUY guests, Damian Strange for inviting me on his Juneteenth panel for the American Composers Forum. I had a great time doing that, and thank you for everyone who participated in that. And also Scott, our very own Megan Oglesby, for the work we've been doing together on some things for TRILLOQUY, but also the names I gave her for her My Name Is series for Performance Today. Performance Today is doing some really great things, and so shout out to both of them. And again, shout out to the new listeners, and for the returning listeners, great to see you back here as well.
You have been getting a lot of extra press recently, though. Talk about some of the other interviews that you've sat in on, some of the profiles that have been done. You said that the article that was supposed to be out yesterday in the Star Tribune was moved to a place where it would get a little more attention.
Shout out to Jenna Ross and those folks over at the Star Tribune here in the Twin Cities. They said they're going to push that newspaper thing forward so we have a bit more of a prominent spot. So yeah, Scott, look, it's really great that we're able to share what we've spent so much time on with more people. I'm excited. I'm really excited.
Me too, man.
All right, Scott. So one thing I wanted to, as we check our accidentals here, one thing I wanted to get your updated response to was the Zach Wolf article where he talks about, what did he say? What the world finally needs.
Yeah, it was something to the effect of, by the way, the title has been kept the same: The Shea Effect: A Classical Music Star Rises. But his lead in the first tweet was something to the effect of, hey, in this guy Shea, we have something that classical music has long needed, a black headliner. To which the Twitter classical realm
came and got him.
Collectively
does what Twitter does. The internet is fast.
Went and found him. Right. Now, he changed.
I never added him. To be fair, I never added him, so I wasn't a part of the real swarm.
No, me neither. And he did change the lead. Would you like to hear the updated lead?
Let's hear it.
The young cellist Shea Mason is bursting to the forefront of a field distressingly low on headliners of color.
So he just said it fancier. He said it with more words.
It was like, well, part of that's right, and I can see how, nice try. Turn around and go back again. No, that's still not accurate.
I mean, so maybe that was a part of your triloquy last week, or we're putting in the accidentals this time around. But listen,
it's a better fit.
But listen, what do you say to the person, Scott, who might say, well, what was wrong with it to begin with? What's wrong with saying that this is what classical music has finally needed, a black headliner, or whatever he said, a headliner of color?
Because there are plenty of headliners of color, if you would look around.
Right.
And, like we went through the list, let's forget the heritage of New York opera alone. And the names that have come across those stages there. And that's what he's supposed to be, as an opera guy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just the fact that there's a whole generation of players that that are not being included here, that have been involved in the foundation of this music, and they were black. So
what did you...
it just seems, it seems tone deaf.
And because of the tone deafness of the headliner and what you've told me, I didn't really spend much time looking at it. But did you read the article itself?
Yep.
Well, what did you think of what he had to say?
Again, it was this story about this fairy tale meteoric rise. Even some of the other people that were quoted in here, I sat thinking, Maestro Alsop, did you really want to have said that sentence that way? Again, you could kind of feel the sentiment that they were going for, but the way they said it comes across as uninformed. And so that's why I want to take this time to say, white people, if you are writing things like this, if this is a quagmire, everybody realizes that there's a lot of opportunities for you to step on your own pork here. So what I would say is read it out loud first before you send. That's all I'm saying. Read it out loud. Does it feel good in your mouth?
But there also should have been somebody black in the room. Like, can we just name that? I mean, come on. Like, even when I say the word black, I'll just go ahead and make sure we're on the same page. I'm thinking of a black American, but an Afro English person, or a black person, however they identify. Like one of those people should have been in the room just to kind of give a little bit of perspective. It's weird for me to think about a room full of white people. Oh wait, this is the New York Times, so yeah, it was American. So a room full of white people talking about a black cellist, and when you think about classical music and the type of music specifically that Shea Mason has risen to fame playing, I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's not like they're praising his Florence Price sonata. They're talking about his Haydn and his Bach, right?
Sure.
Which it is what it is. Maybe that's another conversation. But there needed to have been somebody black in the room. I mean, like I said, adding a sharp to this one. This is a double sharp this week.
So say it out loud first, gang.
And I think you mentioned that you read something else this week.
Right.
Something from Jennifer Coe, you said, the violinist.
Right. Jennifer Coe gave a keynote address for the Institute of Musical Research, and she points out that musicians who play canonical composers are accumulating greater wealth, while those who insist on advocating for underrepresented composers take the economic hit.
Now, we just got done talking about Shea Mason, all right? So let's apply what Jennifer Coe is saying there to Sheku, and why, the issue, this issue of Zach Wolf's byline is problematic. You have Sheku, getting worldwide fame, playing directly from the canon, while there are so many other musicians of color who are dedicated to, music from the diaspora. And I can't think of a cellist off the top of my head, but you've aired on the radio recordings by William Chapman Nyahu, right? That
Sure.
pianist. He is a black pianist who has really dedicated himself to music by black composers. And he is not a name like Sheku is, and I think there's something to what Jennifer Coe is saying. Folks are, we still live in a world where if you want to rise to fame in classical music, you have to do it with, these same old Beethovens and Bachs and Mozart.
That's what had me thinking, what is it going to take to create the America's Got Talent, the top 40 radio version of this? How are we going to shift into a position where you can make a whole bunch of money by bringing out something new, rather than playing the Elgar or?
But let's keep it trill here. Jennifer Coe is a part of that, right? I mean, I know that I've aired her recordings, but I can't remember. Is it the Beethovens and the Mozarts that, she has used to get to where she is as well? And I'm not saying that, she's wrong for calling it out, or she can't, listen, no shade, Jennifer Coe, but
who is she a champion of is what you're asking.
Yeah.
What current or more recent composer?
Or is she calling the issue out, recognizing that, she's been a part of it as well, rising to fame using, or understanding that, with her managers telling her to record this, or, I don't know, Jennifer. I'm extrapolating.
Well,
extrapolating
here, let me point you on Twitter to the Institute of Musical Research. On their page, they have an archive, evidently, so you can check it out.
Okay. Well, if you want to learn more, first of all, Jennifer Coe, is real dope on the violin. I love playing her stuff, but definitely just look up what Jennifer Coe had to say, and think about that. I actually think that's interesting how, the Sheku Kane Mason, and then what Jennifer Coe is saying about, only really being able to find success within the canon. It just, what we say all the time, it speaks to, normalizing more of this music as often as we can. And that's the importance I feel in making sure it gets over the radio, because if folks are hearing it, if their oral definition of this so-called classical music evolves, so can ways in which people can be successful in it, as performers.
Sure. Did you have a sharp, a flat, or a natural this week?
Oh, well, first and foremost, I'm going to put a little natural on something. So last week, and we're going to get into a response from the Institute for Composer Diversity. We kind of talked about that last week. I mentioned Elizabeth A. Baker, new Renaissance artist. I actually did reach out to her for a comment on everything that's been going on. If you need to catch up, just go back to the last opus of TRILLOQUY. She did decline my request for a comment, but she did let me know that she does not use gendered honorifics, so let's put a little natural next to the miss that we put next to her name last week.
Okay.
So, you actually you were able to get a response from Rob Deemer, who heads the Institute for Composer Diversity, right?
That's right.
Now, at the beginning of this opus, we heard words from Sister Souljah, concerning so-called good white people. And I think it's a very provocative statement she made about, what that means to her, how she defines that. And one of the things she talked about in that, Scott, was what we talk about here is the secession of power, stepping down and allowing a person of color in your stead to, run things. And that's something that's actually come up when it comes to the Institute for Composer Diversity. Rob Deemer, this, white male, running this database that's supposed to center the work of composers and music creators of color, and also women creators and artists. And I think you told me that you were able to ask him specifically that question about, stepping down.
What are my reactions? So this particular adventure was not foreseen. I didn't expect it, but at the same time, it's not the first time that it's happened, and it's actually happened a number of times, even way back at the very beginning. I wrote a new music box article in early 2018 when I had just come out with the spreadsheet of the women composers database. And even then there were calls of like, why is this guy doing this thing for women composers? And I wrote in this article for New Music Box, I said, those of us who do have time or resources or both have an obligation to do what we can in whatever way we can to make things better for our entire community. And because I'm in a position of privilege due to who I am, as well as my place in the musical community, I have used and will continue to use my position of privilege to spend as much time and energy as I can to make things better in the best way possible. I would also point out, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but ICD is primarily a volunteer endeavor. Our admin team have been provided stipends for their work after the fact through the support of fundraising campaigns, which have been awesome. But other than that, we receive no funds from the State University of New York at Fredonia, where we're affiliated. I myself have not taken any stipends for my work, and if I get a fee for speaking somewhere, which has happened a few times in the last few months, that fee goes back into ICD. I should also point out that I haven't composed any music of my own in almost a year and a half, and I haven't taken a commission since I started ICD. I know my work with ICD is connecting me with conductors and musicians and folks from many different ensembles all over the world. But those connections are geared towards them increasing performances from underrepresented composers, not my own work. So I want to make that clear. Let's see. There's also the perception, I have heard that there's a perception by some that I hold a position of power as the director of the Institute. And I would say that the only power I hold is to really determine how and where the Institute put its focus. I can't tell anyone what to do. And I know that some might prefer us to focus on certain things over others, maybe focus on a particular demographic group or do things differently. But the concept that I came up with pretty much almost from the start of providing resources from a wide contingent of demographic groups, kind of a big tent idea that these groups have been underrepresented in music, I feel is a good one, and I think is a direction in which we'll continue. And then finally, I should point out that all of our resources, the databases, the analysis is free. No one has to pay a thing, and it's available to the public to not only use but also to download as well. You can go and download the entire composer diversity database and then have at it if you so choose. I hope others would join us or other organizations, and there are many organizations out there that are working towards similar goals. And the last thing I want is for my particular project to monopolize or feel like there's no other room for folks to be able to do it. I think if anything, I just want to be able to create tools that those groups and others can use to diversify repertoire across the board. And if those resources can be a useful tool, then I will consider this project a success.
So he's not going to step down, but has made a lot of other changes. What do you think about that response?
The thing is that I feel that in some ways I'm in a similar boat in that you said you have people asking, what am I doing here on this podcast? That's a great question, and I'm thinking about it all the time, and I don't envy the position that he's in, and he said that this isn't the first time, and he was expecting it too. So,
I mean, but as this conversation applies to Trilloquy, who's in charge here?
go ahead.
No, but I mean, and we can joke about it, but let's just be real. At the end of the day, I take the responsibility of the buck stopping with me, and I think that's a responsibility that I have to take in some of the conversations we have here and some of the things we do. And let's face it, Scott, it's also not lost on me that if the cancel police does come, it's me. The police, the digital police, will be coming after me.
Do you think so?
I think so. I mean, it all. I don't know. I take full responsibility, and it's not like, again, I'm working for you, as the black person here on staff at Trilloquy. There are just certain things that I'm not going to let fly, and
Sure.
and let's just be real. I'm the Beyonce of this, okay?
You ain't lying. You ain't lying.
Okay. So anyway, again, I do hope that everyone listening will go and check out the music of Elizabeth A. Baker. I really do stand by, Scott, what Rob is doing with the Institute of Composer Diversity, because, again, once a week, twice a week, I'm always hearing from that person who, for goodness sake, had never even heard the name William Grant Still,
Sure.
So there's so much work we have to do when it comes to normalizing the idea of the black composer, the black music creative. And I think things like the Institute for Composer Diversity work to that. Now, I will say this. I do think there needs to be a person of color, preferably a black woman, closer to the top. That is what I would like to see. I think that a lot of the missteps will go away if one of the main decision makers, maybe even the person all the way at the top, were a black person or at least a person of color. But
now we're back to the lead on the Shea effect.
Well, what do you mean?
Have a black person in the room.
Well, I mean, exactly, because it just lowers the chance, and again, not that the black person is the representative, just speaks for everything, but there is a lower likelihood of some nonsense slipping through the cracks. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm looking here. I think that's all of my accidentals. Do you have any more accidentals? Any more news from this week?
No, I was waiting for you to have one of each again, so I thought I'd better, go light.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, let's take a little bit of a breather, and we'll get into movement 2, where we talk about what struck a chord. All right, movement 2, strike a chord. So, we're going to talk about a symphony by John Corigliano here in a bit. That kind of ties in, Pride Month specifically, and with the guest that we have today, Mr. Marvell Terry. But I wanted to just very, very briefly, Scott, cover something that has kind of been across the music conversations in general. So there's this rapper named J. Cole, and he put out a song, Snow on the Bluff, in which he's sort of responding, and I can say allegedly whatever, but I think by this point the conversation has evolved enough. He's responding to a woman, also a rapper, who goes by No Name. The name of No Name, and in the song, J. Cole is basically talking about how she called, he feels like that she called him out for not being out in the streets when it comes to all of the protests and the response to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all these other victims of police brutality. These rappers preach about, these things, rap about these things, but don't necessarily do the things, So she went off about that on Twitter. J. Cole felt like she was talking to him and put out this song in which, he's saying that, he doesn't like her tone, and, you don't have to try to belittle me when you're, calling me out and trying to blah, blah, blah. So, of course, that was a whole drama, and No Name responded. Anyway, the only reason I'm bringing it up here, Scott, is because something that you've talked about a lot is making those mistakes and being called out. And, for me, and I know you've gotten the opportunity to kind of listen to the song and read the lyrics, but a lot of people are calling out misogyny here.
Sure.
And I wonder what would sort of be your reaction to your version of this situation, feeling like you're doing the right thing and being called out in a way that isn't comfortable to you, maybe even in a pointed way. Let's say a woman yells at you for your views. Do you feel like you would be obliged to publicly respond specifically by saying that a woman's tone has bothered you?
Good God,
a woman
no.
needs to watch her tone.
Good Lord, no. Read the room, man.
That's been the phrase. I've heard that phrase on so many podcasts and
Have
so
you?
many conversations. Read the room. That's kind of the theme of these past 30 days or so.
That's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And I remember how I talked about when I first started listening to it in the 80s and 90s, how the vibe was different.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like we've progressed to this point that I just don't understand it.
I mean,
I don't see it.
There is a lot of beefs in hip hop these days, and again, I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just thought it was an interesting.
Yeah.
It was interesting how like music, this piece of music, by J. Cole, "Snow on the Bluff," has sort of came into the larger conversation. The side of it that I thought was intriguing was hip hop has always seen J. Cole as one of these, hip hop saints. One of the wise men of hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And for him in this song to admit that, he's not smart like that. He doesn't read like that. He's just, out here rapping and sometimes he's going to say the wrong things. It kind of got me into thinking about that idea of imposter syndrome, being propped up as this thing. And, as the bit of press that I personally get rises up, I can't help but to think about that sometimes. I mean, I definitely do my fair share of reading and making sure that I stay up on everything, but I don't consider myself some sort of like, Aristotle of racial equity in classical music. And it's hard for me to, not fall into the hole of feeling like, am I putting on? Am I someone that they don't think I am? Or you know.
I do. I see what you're saying, but at the same time, you don't go after people personally.
Not all the time.
Come on now, you're nicer than that.
Sure.
You don't do that though.
No, I don't. And certainly I would never tell a woman or anyone to watch their tone. I mean,
good Lord, no.
There have been, look, I'll admit there have been times when women have gotten me together on something I've said.
More often than not, in my case.
And I take it, and sometimes my feelings be hurt, but that means I'm gonna actually think about what happened.
I think so too.
If I don't know if you're interested in this bit of drama, go look up the song "Snow on the Bluff" by J. Cole. I think it's an alright song. I actually originally, Scott, wanted you to listen to it because I thought the guitar was kind of cool. It is kind of like a bluesy sort of,
But then that led me to a movie trailer too.
Oh, did it?
So
a movie called "Snow on the Bluff."
Right.
I wonder if they're talking about actual snow.
It didn't look like it.
Or
it looked like
something else.
It looked like a drug dealer they let get in their back seat for some strange reason. All right.
Yeah, before we get into this oh my goodness.
Coriolanus?
Okay, for real. Let's put some respect on the man's name. Because I always said Corigliano, but you were correcting me. Corigliano. Okay.
Corigliano.
So anyway, before we get into his symphony, you actually had some interesting music that you said struck a chord with you.
There's a new release from a musical artist named Lichens, Lichens, which is the stage/performance name of Robert Akey Aubrey Lowe. And what he does is, that's the thing, is that I do a lot of active listening with his work because I'm sitting there wondering, how is he doing that? How is he getting that? Because he plays guitar, but there's also a certain aspect of the composition that comes from the gear.
I wonder if we can get a sample of the kind of the vibe he gives.
Let's put it in. So let's say right now, out of the gate, the first thing, he reminds me of like a modern impressionist.
Yeah.
So Katie and Delaney over at Classically Black,
They already mad.
they already mad. Ladies, you would hate this guy, but check it out anyway.
I think it's vibey. I think it's really vibey. Great dinner music,
And there's an aspect of his pieces are largely improvisatory.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed at the fact that anybody who listens to his music and goes, oh, well, my kid could do that. Well, no, not really, because this is a man who has learned to play his gear as an instrument, and he's got a way with it, and you can't. Not everybody can do it. So the fact that these compositions that you hear are basically hitting record and he does it, I think that speaks to his musicianship and his composition skills.
I've been doing some interviews with some teenagers for the American Composers Forum. They have a program called Next Notes in which they award high school composers, and a number of them have been getting into the world of improvisatory music and improvisation. I find every time I'm on the radio and I have a piano fantasy or something, I basically talk about how that's music written in the style of improvisation. So all the way from the earliest times of this so-called classical music, all the way up to these sort of compositions, that spirit of improvisation, just kind of going with the flow. Has survived, and it's something, because that's how everything else is, right? I mean, in life we just kind of go with the flow. Sometimes in cooking, you're like, okay, well, let's see what happens.
See what happens when I add this.
And other things with other people. Well, let's just see how this goes. So I really love. I'm falling more and more in love with just the idea of improvisation, especially as it applies to music. So I appreciate your getting me on to this artist and
Lichens,
and especially for Black Music Appreciation Month. Support your Black artists. Actually go out and buy this music. Don't just rip it or whatever like we did here. No, we pay for the music.
We do.
Okay, so we've done a great job, I think, of sort of acknowledging Black Music Appreciation Month. But, Scott, as a member of the queer community, I also don't want to completely pass over Pride Month. So today I thought that I would bring in someone who is actually a specialist in AIDS and HIV prevention, something that folks tend to pay a lot of attention to during Pride Month. And as a connection, I wanted to bring in a piece of music that directly addresses that. So John Corigliano, whose name we've been saying, a contemporary composer, for many years, he refused to write a symphony, because he felt like that was more of a classical romantic thing. The idea of this contemporary symphony isn't really, a thing. But in the late 80s and early 90s, he began to lose a lot of his loved ones to AIDS. And, thinking about how he can respond, what platforms, what abilities he has, being a composer, he decided to put his aversion to a contemporary symphony to the side and actually write one. So his very first symphony is dedicated to those who fell victim during the AIDS crisis. And we listened to a bit of it. We'll put a little bit here as a bridge before we get into my conversation with Marvell. But, we listened to the Tarantella movement. Yeah. And I think there's an interesting conversation to have there. So for folks who don't know, Scott, a musical Tarantella is kind of a folksy way to reference what sort of story, what idea?
The idea is that you were bitten by a spider, and in order to reverse the effects of the venom, there's a very fevered sort of dance that needs to be done in order to get you back to being right.
So John Corigliano subtitled this second movement of Tarantella, the idea of being proverbially bitten by this proverbial bug, and this dance that you're supposed to do to get rid of it, but there is no dance. And if you go and listen to the entire movement, we can't put the movement here in the Opus, but I really encourage you to listen to that entire movement. where it goes between this slow music of uncertainty and fear into these little, sequences of that really feverish dance.
A fit, really.
Yeah, it sounds like a fit. And, I think it speaks to, back in those days how, an HIV positive status was seen as a death sentence. There's a lot of that darkness in this music.
And I was, when this fight was just starting, when the epidemic was just beginning, it was affecting, just like the pandemic that we have now, it was touching everybody's lives.
Right.
And there was a real sense of fear around starting new relationships, and the possibilities of coming in contact with it unwittingly, and everything was very real.
And you talk about, you draw that comparison between then and COVID. It's actually interesting because Marvell and I talk about the fact that in the work he does, Dr. Anthony Fauci has been a huge name for decades now. Like, how he knew how, he went to this, he talks about how he goes to a conference and he got to meet Anthony Fauci years ago, as this bastion in the world of AIDS and HIV prevention, and how, that conversation is directly related to COVID and the spread of that virus, and, using different protections, the face mask for COVID, the condom for AIDS and HIV, and how you have to realize they're not 100%, but how to be as responsible as you can. And it's really fascinating, the connections you can make. So I wanted to again bring up this piece of music as yet another example of one of these compositions that doesn't always make it into the concert hall all that often. It doesn't make it onto the radio waves all that often. But this so-called classical music relates to the world in a real way, in a real reactionary way, and we spend so much time sort of overlooking it for the sake of the canon. It's something how, the world works and life works. I can remember back to freshman year, just somehow just finding that group of black gays, where we just hang out in somebody's dorm room and talk shit about these men. And
right.
You were among them. So it's great for that to come around full circle to get to commune with you here.
Right. I appreciate that. I do remember those days. And I also appreciate how many of us have grown, and in our queerness, in our blackness, some 15, almost 10 to 15 years later, to see how we have grown and being advocates in our respective spaces.
Yeah. And, exploring that queerness and that blackness is something that you've had the opportunity to dedicate your career to. And we're definitely going to get into that in honor of this Pride Month. But I did want to start out with a conversation of music. So, being from, you don't live in Memphis now, but being from Memphis, a very musical city.
Right.
I'm sure you have some sort of a deep relationship with just music in general. What is that? What are some of the first sorts of musics you remember really being engaged by?
Right. I think, one, I'm a church boy. And so I think part of that fabric of who I am, residing in Memphis, growing up in Memphis, definitely was around church, around gospel music, around I remember when the Church of God in Christ had the annual convention in Memphis, going to some of the midnight musicals at Mason Temple, and getting all of the friends together from the University of Memphis, going to some of that and staying till 5 a.m. in the morning, and then going to Waffle House.
Yes.
So, also growing up in a city where B.B. King was part of the history, the Stax Museum, Stax Records. Some of our ancestors recorded in that space, but also the city where Elvis Presley has this mansion in Whitehaven, but also to talk about some of the history and how he also looted some of Black folks' music. And so,
Yeah, more than some of it, I'll say.
Right, more than some of it. And so how as a Black kid growing in the city, we never took a field trip to Elvis Presley's home, but we learned about Black artists and Black art in the city. And so really more so kind of that church background, but also as I grew up learning about around the Lemoyne-on area, around what Black folks' contribution was to music in this country.
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, Lemoyne-on is a historically Black college down there in Memphis. When you mentioned, coming up through the church and engaging music in that way, like so many of us did, I wonder if that queerness, the discovery of yourself and who you are, ever was at odds with that upbringing, if you had that perspective at all.
I think at some point in my life, I did not grow up in a church where anti-gay sermons were preached. I will say that, and also recognize that moving in and out of spaces where Black and brown queer people have been hurt by the church.
Right.
I didn't grow up under that experience, but I know so many people have this relationship with the church. I did struggle with my queerness, being gay, and also loving the church. I often tell people my activism and advocacy came from the Black church.
Yeah.
It taught me how to schedule meetings. It taught me how to get people on the phone. It taught me how to mobilize. It taught me how to count money in Sunday school. But it also taught me that Black folks, to get to a meeting, need some food.
Yeah.
And I learned that, but also on the flip side of that, my wholeness as this person that loved guys and had this same-sex attraction and the reconciliation. I'll be 35 this year. I think it takes a lifelong journey almost to reprogram yourself and to tell yourself that all those identities that you have can exist in one person, and you can work and serve in church and have all those identities show up.
Absolutely. I'll say that, I was one of those people who was hurt by the Black church growing up. I didn't have that positive experience, but, growing up and understanding specifically the history of the spiritual and how that has a place in the Black church and how that had a place, in our first alleged freedom. And the spreading of messages in that way. That's always why I have considered the spiritual America's original classical music, something that your partner Adrian also affirms in his work.
Yeah.
But that definition of classical music is still sort of fringe for a lot of people. I wonder what is your relationship with the idea of so-called classical music and how you've defined that over the years for yourself.
Sure. You mentioned my partner, Adrian Dunn, who has a project out around repurposing the spirituals for lives of Black men. But to be honest, that was my introduction to classical music within the last year and a half. As a kid coming up through Memphis, economics, I believe, played a role into getting classical music to Black and brown kids in that city. I went elementary, middle school, and high school. There was not one time that I've experienced classical music in Memphis. And from my understanding, we do have there's an opera house, there's classical music, there's an orchestra in Memphis that I've never had an opportunity. While they had concerts on the Mississippi River, I remember the commercials, I remember the advertisement, but as a young kid growing up in that city, never having the opportunity to experience classical music. Let me tell you my first experience in classical music.
Please.
Right. Was going to Temple Deliverance, Church of God in Christ, Bountiful Blessings, G. Patterson, and I saw a full orchestra playing in the pit before the full choir. I was amazed meeting some of my friends at the University of Memphis who said that they played in the orchestra at the Temple Deliverance Church of God in Christ. And so seeing this full circle moment as we talk about spirituals, as we talk about classical music, and as we talk about my background of the church, for this actual moment that there is preaching, there is a choir, Black folks music, Pentecostal music, folks falling out, and you got a big harp right here.
Amen.
And so my experience with classical music has always, up until this point in my life, has been something that is very foreign to me. I felt classical music was very white, to be very honest.
Sure, yeah.
And I felt there was nothing that resonated with me as far as the music, the lyrics, the language. I did not see how that resonated with me in my life. At this point, the way that I define classical music is Western European approach to something that they stole from us as Black folks. And so as we talk about looting again, I think it is the music that white folks stole from Black music and tried to make it their own. And so my experience now with classical music, I've had an opportunity to meet amazing Black classical artists, to meet amazing Black opera singers. Never in my life did I have an opportunity. Yeah, Marian Anderson, Leontine Price.
Right.
I think we learn about those historic figureheads, but it almost seems that there are only 5 people that we can name, and there's a whole cluster and whole spectrum of Black artists that reside in the classical space. And so how do we look at challenging opera houses to ensure that they teach Black and brown kids, that they diversify their funding efforts to ensure that young kids living in urban communities or major metropolitan cities, that music gets to them as well?
Right. And, something that everyone is, a lot of people anyway, are starting to explore within the category of so-called classical music is protest and how music can drive protest. And I know that protest music is something that you have had an interest in outside of the classical lens. And I know you gave Wale's new project a shout out on your social media. I wonder, and as we transition here into specifically into the work you do, I wonder if protest music, classical or otherwise, has had a role in your career and the way you view AIDS and HIV prevention.
I think music, protest music, definitely, yes, has had a role in the way I inform my protest or my activism. Thinking about the early days of the HIV and AIDS movement, but even more so that I have to go back to the civil rights movement and the freedom songs. And when we protest, we did chants. People were singing. When you look at the March on Washington and how Harry Belafonte was present, and some of the Marian Anderson, some of those artists were very much present during their time, and how what art and music means to movements. So now we have this LGBT movement, and how during the ACT UP era, on Broadway, many of the singers, and listening to Jennifer Holliday talk about Dreamgirls, and how many of the dancers, many of the actors in Dreamgirls died over the weekend or over a course of period of time, and how music played a critical role in that. And so the way that it informs my activism is when hosting rallies, hosting protests. It is important to have artists present. I think protest music ignites us. It informs our activism. It encourages us along the way. I think music is this critical thing. It is the soundtrack to our lives. When I listen to music, or when I am trying to prepare something as it relates to policy around HIV and AIDS or issues around LGBTQ, I think those are the moments that we often go to music. And we go to, Wale is one person that I highlighted, but Kendrick Lamar,
Yeah,
You
shout out
know,
to him.
right? Shout out to
Pulitzer Prize winning
right
composer.
composer Kendrick Lamar. You know,
Yeah,
The Pimp a Butterfly. You think about Solange, A Seat at the Table.
yeah.
There's a black trans woman, Shea has a song called American Pie that talks about the plight of black trans women. I think all of those. That music speaks to what I do on a daily basis, looking at young activist groups such as BYP 100,
Mm.
that is based in Chicago, but looking at a guy named Jonathan Likes, who is kind of this social activist who uses music at the protests. And I think music, for me, has informed it in a way that puts words on paper, and that is very encouraging before the actual activism. And I think when we get to the actual activism, as a Black queer person, I love music.
Yeah.
And I think it is a way to mobilize my peers.
Absolutely. And, with this being Black Music Appreciation Month, that's a conversation that's been highlighted even more. But it is also Pride Month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure this is a very busy time of the year for you.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about, your work, what your job is, and why it's important for you to do your job, again, from that Black perspective. I think folks try to bring in the queer community as a whole into some of these conversations, but just like every other aspect of the world, Black folks have unique challenges.
Right. Yeah. So my work around HIV, ensuring that Black voices are in LGBT spaces, kind of all of that work that I've done probably over the last 10 years, actually started being diagnosed with HIV in Memphis. While being a student at the University of Memphis, getting sick, never really hearing about HIV really in the education system, hearing about STDs from a heterosexual perspective. But of course, there's no school teaching around gay men having sex, or what is there's no right way, but what is a very safe way to have sex? What is a very a consensual way to have sex between two guys or those same-sex relationships? And so my first experience of doing this work is, one, my own diagnosis, going down to the county health department, getting my test results, and then being informed that I have a CD4 count of 2. And for many of the listeners, to put that in context, a CD4 measures kind of your immune system. And for me, the lowest one can get is a 0. And so I was at a 2.
Oh, wow.
And so I was very sick at that time. And I remember the social worker who talked to me with her back turned towards me and told me, "Do you know what that really means?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You should be dead right now." Because your CD4 is so low. And so for me, that began my day of activism. And it also began the day that I very early on did this dance of linking into care, HIV care, staying adherent to medications. I did that dance for about 2 or 3 years because of stigma, because I felt how could this be me? How could this happen to me? After that, I opened up an organization called the Red Door Foundation that I started in Memphis, which was to provide services for Black gay men, because there was not an organization ran by a Black gay man. If we are to be one of the highest statistics in the community, why aren't we in leadership roles in our communities? Something that I saw a need for. And so I started an organization because, one, Black folks were not leading organizations as it relates to HIV and AIDS. And then I started a convening that lasted 8 years called Saving Ourselves Symposium. I called it SOS for Black LGBTQ people. And we moved it across the South being located in Memphis. We had it in Jackson, South Carolina, Birmingham, because we wanted to move it to locations where normally national conferences do not go to smaller cities because of the heavy burden of finances. But I wanted to ensure that we mobilize folks in areas that have high HIV rates. And when you look at those cities, those are metropolitan cities in the South. That's Memphis, that's Jackson, Mississippi, that's New Orleans, that's Charleston, that's Miami, Florida, Orlando, Florida.
Yeah, Atlanta, yeah.
Atlanta. How can I forget Atlanta? These are cities where Black folks live. These are cities where Black folks reside. But we also look at these are cities where have high rates of COVID-19.
Right.
And so the complexities of health disparities, of HIV, of heart disease, hypertension, now layered with this issue of COVID-19. And so that is kind of how I arrived doing HIV work. It is both personal for me and as well as professional for me. I also created a consulting group to inform institutions on how to communicate to Black and brown queer folks, as far as their languaging, as far as their promotions, as far as their advertising. And I'll also full-time do grant making through an organization in Washington, D.C. called AIDS United, where I manage a Southern Fund for organizations where we give money to continue to do their HIV work.
Yeah. And, when you hit on the education piece, that's what I always go back to, because, for lack of a better phrase, gay men, specifically Black gay men of our generation, we had to learn about our sexuality on the streets. For lack of a better phrase, we didn't have, I won't speak for all of us, but, I certainly didn't have parents that could speak to what it meant to engage sexually with other men, and neither did neither did the education systems.
Right.
So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you could just lay out some of that language that folks do not know. You've already talked about CD4. What about these acronyms, AIDS, HIV? What is that? Because I think sometimes we take for granted that a lot of folks don't understand the difference between those two words, those two phrases.
Right. So language is very important in our country, in our context, in our community. I believe that Black gay folks, Black queer folks make up a very interesting language, and we can talk to one another in a very interesting way. But even more so when it comes to our education, I think many of us learned about sex through pornography, watching porn. And unfortunately, for some of us, we did not see, safer sex practices through porn. And so we didn't see the guy put on the condom if he used a condom. And, that I in this moment, state that, as people's choices to use condoms, there are many ways of protecting oneself. You have condoms, you have pre-exposure prophylaxis, which stands for PrEP, which is a pill a day that you take. And so recognizing that there are multiple ways in 2020 that people can protect themselves. But in the early 2000s, you're talking about a young gay kid who was looking at porn, learning how to be a top or learning how to be a bottom, and not seeing the bottom squeeze up or tighten up. I was like, this hurts a little bit to me. What type of lube do I supposed to use? Water-based or silicone? What is best for me? And so a lot of that for us has been trial and error, where we've had to educate ourselves. And let's not talk about the stigma of telling our peers that we are living with HIV. And so when we talk about language, to say someone is HIV positive opposed to living with HIV, it speaks to the whole person. It speaks to the totality of the person. We often don't say someone is diabetes positive or someone is cancer positive. They're living with cancer. They are living with HIV. And so it speaks to their resilience. It speaks to them thriving. The difference, we often say in the community that they have full-blown AIDS. That is not possible because there's no half AIDS. You know what I mean? And so either the person has HIV or has AIDS. And so HIV can be diagnosed through a test, through an oral swab, or through a blood test, but a provider, a medical provider, has to diagnose someone with AIDS. And so AIDS is the progression of HIV. And so you can't, get tested for AIDS, quote unquote, at the club, or, sidewalk testing or festival testing. What they are testing you for is HIV. It is a medical provider based on your viral load and based on your CD4 and based on any other opportunistic infections. Does a medical provider diagnose someone with AIDS? And so it's been this relationship that we often see wording as HIV/AIDS. And I think that often confuses a lot of people to say those words are interchangeable. And what I've tried to do in a format is do HIV and AIDS, or HIV or AIDS, in my writing format and the way that I use language and community.
Anthony Fauci, the Dr. Anthony Fauci, is a name everyone knows today because of coronavirus. But I understand he actually has a legacy in the sort of work that you do.
Yes. I have been familiar with Anthony Fauci. I think, so one of the larger conferences for people doing HIV work is called there's an international conference on AIDS, and then there's a United States conference on AIDS. And so I also want to reference that a lot of institutions who were started in the 80s and early 90s still use the word AIDS. And so, as we talk about language justice and as we talk about changing language, we also have to recognize that a lot of historical institutions use antiquated language. Look at the NAACP, the National Council for Negro People, National Advancement for. So it's a lot of institutions that use a lot of outdated language. But my first introduction to Dr. Fauci was at a United States conference on AIDS. And he took the podium, and he is such a giant in our community because he is one of the first people that put a name to it. One of the first people that stood up to the Ronald Reagan administration and challenged them and really went to the NIH, put a name to this, and began to create methods of treatment and this treatment model for the community. And so before the world kind of knew about Anthony Fauci as it relates to COVID-19, when I saw him approach the platform at the White House, I could say I know him. Because he has been a part of the salvation for so many of us who are living with HIV. Not only us living with HIV, but I think he's been part of the salvation to prevent people from being diagnosed with HIV in this country.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, politicizing when it comes to what we're all living with right now. The coronavirus, we're all living with it in a way. I wonder if you're being familiar with Dr. Fauci, the work you do. I wonder if it's informed an opinion of yours when it comes to coronavirus prevention and response. I mean, all the way down to wearing that mask, unfortunately, has become a politicized thing. I mean, does your experience in HIV and AIDS provide you a leg up, if you will, when it comes to coronavirus?
I think so. I think COVID-19 is viewed as something that can be passed through multiple forms of, there's much speculation through saliva, through kissing, through all of those forms, which was very early on in the days of HIV. People did not know how one could get HIV, similar to COVID. It is shifting every single day. Articles are saying many different things of how one could get coronavirus and what does it look like once it's in your body.
Right.
And so for me, being in spaces of infectious disease, I was very familiar with the route that they were going, using protection, which is the mask. In my community, it's a condom or it's a PrEP, or it is, many methods that people use for protection. It is having to go get tested. I got tested for COVID last week. I wanted to experience that as a person who is in community, who is about informing people through the multiple platforms that I use. I wanted to see how the test went, how to go get the test, what systems and what structures do we have to go through to get a test. As a person that knows the healthcare system very well, because of having to get into the healthcare system, I wanted to know, what was it like to get a COVID test? How many times do you have to call the same person over and over to get your results for a test? I wanted to know that experience. And so that experience going in to the doctor, I did not live with HIV in the 80s and the 90s, of course, but I could see what those people probably went through.
Mm-hmm.
The medical provider was fully gloved. That she had a mask on, she had her hair protected, she had multiple layers of protective gear on.
Mm-hmm.
That as a person living with HIV, that is often viewed as an infection or something that someone else can get, in that moment reminded me of what people had to go through when people were unsure how HIV was passed from one person to another. And so I think this experience has taught me a lot, but I also think that I came into this experience, talking about the coronavirus, definitely with a little bit more knowledge than an average American.
Sure. And, when it comes to, folks like Dr. Fauci and others, Black queer men and women and those who identify otherwise, we've had some of those non-Black allies, but, it's a question that comes to me every day from non-Black people. Well, how can I help? How can I be an ally? So I'd like to throw that question to you, to the non-Black person asking how they can be an ally specifically to Black queer people as it relates to AIDS and HIV. What would you tell them?
I think there are multiple things to tell them. The first thing I could do to tell them is, one, educate yourself.
Yeah.
I think we often want to be allies in various spaces and various industries without spending the time to educate ourselves about that industry, about that issue that we want to be an ally about. And so the first thing I say, educate yourself. The second thing I say, find something in your local community, whether it is that community-based organization, whether it is that AIDS servicing organization, ASO or CBO, community-based organization. Find ways, how can I volunteer? How can I show up and be present? How can I donate my dollars, to small organizations? And so similar to the music space, you all have the historical houses that get funded, or institutions. Similar to HIV space, the money from the government and from the CDC often go to the larger organizations that hire white people to write grants.
Right.
While you have smaller grassroots organizations created by Black trans women and Black gay men that struggle to get the funding because they don't have the money to hire the grant writers to make their grant look like something that they're not really doing. And so seek out a small organization that is in your community. I would preference it with a person of color, with a Black trans woman, with a Black gay man. The Latinx community also needs support. And so how do we show up and try to fund those initiatives that they're doing, or try to make many MINI grants within your community if you have those resources? And then the last thing that I would say, speak out when you see injustice. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, that also means in the health system as well.
Yeah.
Recognizing that Black folks don't often get access to care like our counterparts. Data suggests that Black gay men don't have more sex than our racial counterparts. It is about access to health care. It is about our geography. It is about our social networks. And so it's not because we have more. There are other issues that impact our community. When I do training with clinics, I'll often say, who wants to come into a clinic with white walls, white doctors, and white floors?
And white coats.
And white coats. Nothing is reflected in this institution that represents me. Where's your Black art or art that speaks to my experience? Where are the quotes by James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin? Where are the people behind the front desk that looks like me? Where are the workers? Where are the Black doctors? We know they exist, that look like me and that can speak to my cultural experiences. It's one thing to attack the disease, but it's another thing to speak to my culture, to understand stigma, to understand why people do the things that they do once they get to the provider. And so I feel that those are the things that I can tell someone that who wants to be an ally. And then finally, I will also add, people often say they don't know no one with HIV, and I will push back on that.
Yeah.
I don't think we often make spaces comfortable for people to share their lived experience and for people to disclose to people, I am a person living with HIV. I remember early on how painful it was to go to the doctor every 3 months, how painful it was to take medication. One of the very first 3-in-1 pills was called a tripla. And when I got diagnosed, that was the pill that I was on, and how it made you kind of float and sick during the daytime. It is support like that that one needs to kind of get through the process.
Yeah. Before I give you the opportunity to plug all your things and let people know how they can find you, I want you to address the shirt you're wearing. And for the folks only listening, it says, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams." In what way do you see yourself as your ancestors' wildest dreams?
I believe Maya Angelou said, "I am the hope and the dream of the slave." I don't know where my ancestors thought that I would be at this point, but I believe that I have gone beyond what they think that I will become. And so when I say I, that is a Black person living with HIV, a Black queer person, a Black person of the church, the multiple identities that I bring to this space. I look at the protests across the country and demonstrations, and I called my grandmother the other day, who marched in 1968 after Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. And I asked her how that experience was. And she marched. And she said, "I struggled to keep up with the crowd, but I marched." And her response to me was, "I want you to be safe." And I told her, "You did it. Now you don't have to do it. You cheer us on." And so I believe that I am her wildest dream, that I am the wildest dream of my great-grandmother, Elizabeth Hyman. I don't know if they thought that we would go this far. I believe, yes, they knew what they were fighting for in the present moment, but to see us back in the streets again, Fannie Lou Hamer said that young people, if they don't have it, you're not going to have it, and we all going to tear it up. And so she said that in an interview again in 1968, after Dr. King was assassinated, that if young people don't have it, you ain't going to have it, and the young people going to tear it up. We are in 2020. And so I don't know if our ancestors, both Black and queer, both Black and female, knew how far we were going to go. But I am bold enough to believe that as we move in this space, we have an army of 1,000 behind us, fighting for us and rooting us on. And so when I wear this shirt, it is a moment for me to reflect on what our ancestors fought for. And it is a moment that dream that they had, that Dr. King had, I am the wildest dream. I've gone beyond that initial dream that they wanted.
Amen. Amen. How can folks reach out to you, learn more about the work you do, and contribute to the work that you're doing?
Sure. Marvell Terry on all social media platforms. We are redoing my website because I'm getting ready to launch a book around mobilizing and protesting. And so one of the ways that people can donate is through Cash App. You know, cash $ Marvell Terry is one way. As I, in my own way, support Black artists, one of which is my partner. And so adriandunn.com is another way that by him you can find me, because I think we move as one, that I try to find ways to support Black artists. And so, of course, Marvell Terry on all platforms. There's a Black Music Matters t-shirt found on my partner's website that I ask that people support. And by essence, by supporting buying that t-shirt, you're supporting me as well.
Marvell, it's been marvelous to talk to you. Thanks so much for being on TRILLOQUY.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we're here in movement 4. I have a few things, so let me go ahead.
I might as well just come over here, with a snack, and just wait for you to get
and I left. Oh, sorry, I'm hitting the mic. I left some things out actually, but just real quick. So it is Pride Month, but as Marvell and I explored, it is important to recognize the specific intersection of being Black and queer, because racism exists, misogyny, lots of things. Certainly, though, racism exists very much within the LGBT community. So over the weekend, a lot of people, Scott, have been learning about Juneteenth all of a sudden, right? So that's one thing.
Right.
Okay. Now, this man, this conservative on Twitter, his name is Chadwick Moore. He got nerve to go on there and say this: "I'm sorry, Blacks," and he doesn't capitalize the Black as you're supposed to, first and foremost. So for those of you who don't know, Black, it's a capital B, okay? He says, "I'm sorry, Blacks, but you already have a month. Juneteenth isn't a thing. Don't colonize our month as well. Thanks. Signed, the gays." So this is, and this is not what this TRILLOQUY is about, but I only bring that up to make this point, and I make this point during Pride Month, Scott. Black people who are queer deal with as much racism and misogyny and bigotry within the community as out. So every time we're talking, mics off or whatever, and you tie in the queer community into conversations of racial equity, it does not apply, because within that, because everybody within the alphabet squad is not doing the work that I'm doing, right. In many instances, as we've seen here, is standing against it. So I hope that's something that you can really understand and wrap your mind around moving forward. The next time you want to lump in the gays with, racial equity or whatever, because it's just not going to work.
Is it a capital G?
I don't know if it's a capital G or not, but it's definitely a capital B, damn it, okay?
Got it.
Okay, I want to quickly bring up Eastman real quick. Shout out again to Katie and Delaney. That's y'all school. So they announced, earlier that in the coming year, all of their concerts would feature a piece of music by a Black composer. So they recently had like a town hall sort of Zoom thing. And the question, and this is courtesy of Stephanie Matthews. Shout out to her, guest on Last Opus, for this transcription. I did watch the video. The quality is just not great to put into the Opus, but I'm going to read it here. So the question from someone was, with many arts organizations pushing for more social consciousness in regards to production, as the Manhattan School of Music's artistic director of opera, this was MSM, not Eastman, but shout out to Katie and Delaney anyway, Manhattan School of Music in New York City. So as Manhattan School of Music's artistic director of opera, what is your stance on resurrecting works like Lehar's The Land of Smiles, which play into racial stereotypes and portray Asians as one-dimensional caricatures? And that opera is just one example. We can talk about Aida. We can talk about Carmen, overly sexualizing and villainizing the woman, So many examples. So the director says, just cut them off. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. And that is, that is a reduction of the, oh, what was that question? Oh, he's trying to be political. Oh, just cut him off, So here we go. We have one of these large educational institutions stepping forward when the time is right to verbally say, oh, we're going to include the black music. But when someone black, the person sounded black, asking the question, brings an actual issue to you, you kind of brush it under the rug and put it aside. Manhattan School of Music, y'all got to do better. And this counts for all of these institutions who are paying us lip service right now. But when it comes to the actual action, get yourself together.
Say the sentence out loud.
Yeah, as you said in your accidentals today.
Yeah.
Go. I have one more, but it looks like you have something there. I'll give you.
Well, because this feeds into it. Okay, this is, and it isn't even dragging. This is my segment where we say, "Brah, get yourself together." Here's the story. Here's a story from the Times. This is over in the UK, right? Coronavirus swan song looms for orchestral music. The lead? You ready?
Yeah.
Leading conductors have warned that orchestral music is staring at an abyss, with a danger that there will be, quote, no music written about our times, for our times, by our living composers.
This is coming from what news source?
The Times.
What is wrong with people? What is really wrong with people? Didn't we just get done talking about Valerie Coleman's 7 o'clock shout? Didn't we just get done talking about that? I thought I talked about that, and that's one of many,
Say the headline out loud first before you press send.
So what they mean was the comfortable situation of us sitting in this cozy concert hall and listening to this music written about these times is going to go away when they wasn't doing that anyway.
Yep.
Y'all were playing Beethoven and carrying on.
Yep.
Anyway, the Times, get yourself together. Oh my goodness.
This is I think that this just might be my charge in this podcast is to just to find all of these examples.
Because I don't have time for the Times and y'all. I'd be trying to do my own work. I mean, so did you okay, for real. Let's keep it real. Did you organically come across that and were like, what in the hell?
I did because a lot of the people
Okay, wow,
a
good
lot
for
of
you.
a lot of the people that I'm following on Twitter are much better at ferreting this out than I am.
Sure.
And for me, I like reading the comments. Like one of the comments was just one line, and he was a composer. He said, "Have you asked any of us? Have you listened to anything new? Go look at some of the websites of the artists that we've had just on this podcast alone, and you've got plenty. And by the way, Garrett, as of this recording, I have not received word on any orchestra planning an all-black season yet. So, tick-tock, tick-tock.
I mean, and think about the ring of it, the Black Lives Matter season. Somebody could really take, anyway. All right, so my final little triloquy here. Again, looping us all the way back to the beginning of this opus, the words from Sister Souljah. Okay, so I'll tell you. So my rediscovery of that is due to I've been going down these deep YouTube rabbit holes. You see, instead of reading bullshit articles like that from the Times, I've been going back and hearing what the conversation, what the rhetoric was back in the late 80s, early 90s on some of these talk shows, going back to see what folks like Sister Souljah, Louis Farrakhan were saying on network TV back in those days, and what can we learn from it? What can we pull from it? Now, looking up so getting down this rabbit hole, I get into the Phil Donahue show. So I want to ask you, I'm sure you remember that being on TV, right?
I do, and if I saw it, that usually meant I was homesick from school.
So I'm exploring Phil Donahue. Well, I'm not exploring Phil Donahue. I'm exploring folks like Farrakhan and Sister Souljah, and I get into the Honorable Louis Farrakhan's appearance on the Phil Donahue show. And I have to sit through this.
So you're not thrilled then with, for example, the kind of stand-up work that I'm mother effer, nigger. He used the word nigger often. I'm asking you.
No, I am not thrilled to see not only Eddie Murphy, but there are many white comedians who use the same foul language.
Now listen, Scott.
I'm listening.
And Louis Farrakhan came up on TRILLOQUY before, and we got a bit of I got a bit of feedback from it. So let me say here right now that. And I shouldn't have to. This is the problem. I should not have to tell anyone that I don't 100% agree with Louis Farrakhan. I mean, for goodness sakes, as a black queer man, you know, he has spoken against gay people plenty. You know, so it's not about that, but it's about pulling something from what he's saying and the rhetoric from what he's saying, and not completely trying to cancel him. And in the in the shows, you know, in the Phil Donahue show episodes that I watch, you know, folks in the audience make the point, black people in the audience make the point that, you know, our leaders are ostracized. People who we choose to look up to and get knowledge from are ostracized far more than folks in the media and folks in leadership positions and places of visibility on the white side of things. Okay. So we have Phil Donahue here, won't say the word motherfucker, but will say the N word, won't he?
That just, and it's, he's got it backwards, if you ask me.
Because I could sit here and say the N word if I wanted to, but I'm in mixed company, so I just. So how does that apply to today? There are a lot of things happening in the world that, at the surface level, the everyday white person, the everyday well-doing, good-doing black person even may not see as the right thing. I'm thinking about some of the rioting and some of that stuff. But a part of it is cleaning up your own house, as Sister Soldier said, you know, talking to your parents, you know, finding out what power you can succeed that you need to be worried about before you know, want to demonize the way black people choose to do things and the people we look up to. So again, I will repeat it again, even though I feel like I do not have to. I do not 100% agree with the work and the words of Louis Farrakhan. That is not why I'm bringing this up. All I'm saying is, in my personal rediscovery of some of the black rhetoric that was happening in days past, you know, Louis Farrakhan and Sister Soldier are folks, just two examples of the people that a lot of black people are looking back to, and we deserve that autonomy. We deserve to look to people who are seen as our leaders and to take something from what they you know, think or what they have to say. I mean, as Sister Soldier said, she felt like she never met a good white person, and her definition of that. A lot of people, a lot of black people will say the same thing. Are you one of those good white people? I don't know. See you next time.